Have you ever built a beautiful, sturdy house for someone, brick by brick, paying for every nail and every beam, only to be treated like you're the ghost haunting the basement? You can hear the laughter and the music from the party upstairs. You know you're the reason the lights are on, but no one ever comes down to check on you. That was my life. And this party? This was the night the foundation I'd built finally, spectacularly, cracked. If you've ever been the reliable one, the sensible one, the one who quietly pays the bills while someone else gets all the glory, you're going to want to stick around for this. Hit that like button, because you, my friends, are my people. The party was for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. And it was, by all accounts, a masterpiece. It unfolded in the sprawling, manicured gardens of their beautiful colonial home in upstate New York. My beautiful colonial home, technically. But that was a detail I kept locked away, like the deed itself, in a safe deposit box. Fairy lights were strung through the branches of the ancient oak trees, casting a soft, dreamy glow over the whole affair. A string quartet was set up on the flagstone patio, their bows dancing through a Vivaldi piece that was just loud enough to feel elegant but quiet enough not to drown out the conversation. Caterers in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and impossibly delicate hors d'oeuvres. The air smelled of money, a heady mix of night-blooming jasmine from the meticulously tended flower beds, expensive perfume, and my father's favorite cigars. It was a perfect illusion, a perfect stage. And I, the producer, director, and sole financial backer of the entire production, was playing the role of a stagehand, standing just inside the French doors, watching the performance unfold. At the center of it all, of course, was my sister, Chloe. Chloe was a supernova in a sea of dimmer stars. She was wearing a shimmering, backless dress that probably cost more than my first car, laughing a bright, theatrical laugh that made heads turn. She wasn't just attending the party, she was inhabiting it, flitting from one group to another like a hummingbird, leaving a trail of dazzled guests in her wake. She was 2 years younger than me, but she possessed a kind of effortless, predatory charm that made people of all ages lean in, eager for a dose of her light. "Chloe, you look absolutely stunning." "Chloe, that story is hilarious." "Chloe, you simply must tell me where you got that dress." I watched as my father, a man who liked to think of himself as a modern-day patriarch, slung a proud arm around her shoulders. "This one," he boomed to a captive audience of his golfing buddies. "She's my firecracker. Got more talent and ambition in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. A true artist of life." His friends all nodded in agreement, their eyes shining with admiration for Chloe. I took a slow sip of my water. An artist of life. It was a beautiful phrase. It was also a beautiful way of saying she hadn't held a real job for more than 6 months and currently had about $200 to her name. The dress she was wearing, I'd gotten the credit card alert for it last Tuesday. I was the opposite of a firecracker. I was the breaker box in the basement, unseen, unglamorous, but absolutely essential. No one ever throws a party for a breaker box. You only notice it when the power goes out. My mother, the chief enforcer of our family's carefully constructed narrative, glided over to me, her smile a little too tight, her eyes scanning the crowd for any potential social hiccups. "Maya, darling," she said, her voice a perfectly modulated whisper. "You look so sensible." She patted my arm. It was meant as a compliment, but in our family's language. Sensible was a synonym for disappointing. It meant I was wearing a simple, elegant black dress instead of something that screamed for attention. It meant my hair was in a neat chignon instead of a cascade of blonde waves like Chloe's. It meant I was a solid, reliable shadow that made my sister's light seem even brighter. "Chloe is the artist," she continued, her gaze already drifting back to her favored daughter. "But you, my dear, you are our rock." She gave my arm a final squeeze before delivering the real point of her visit. "Darling, I just spoke with the head caterer. There were some last-minute overages for the imported oysters. Would you mind just taking care of it? You know how your father worries about these little details." I nodded, my own smile feeling like a mask. "Of course, Mom." She beamed. Her mission accomplished. "You're a lifesaver," she said, before drifting back into the party, leaving me with the unspoken, but ever-present weight of their financial reality. The little details were my entire life. I was the family's silent, invisible foundation. I was the reason my father's consulting business, a glorified hobby he started after being retired from his last real job, was still solvent. I was the reason Chloe could afford to find herself in a series of expensive apartments, art classes, and yoga retreats. I was the reason they were all standing in this magnificent house, drinking champagne that cost $200 a bottle, pretending to be the masters of a universe I had secretly built for them. I watched my father hold court by the outdoor bar. He was telling one of his favorite stories about a savvy real estate deal he'd supposedly masterminded a few years back. The story involved him outsmarting a rival and snatching up a prime piece of property for a steal. His friends listened, enthralled by his business acumen. I had to physically stop myself from laughing out loud. The deal he was talking about was a disastrous commercial property investment he'd made. The rival he'd outsmarted was a foreclosure notice from the bank. And the steal was me, quietly liquidating $250,000 in stock to bail him out before he lost everything, all while letting him believe he'd navigated the crisis with his own genius. It had started out of love, of course, it always does. When I sold my data analytics startup 5 years ago, I was overwhelmed with a sense of vertigo and more money than I knew what to do with. My first instinct was to share it, to make my family's life easier, to give them everything I thought they wanted. So I bought this house. I set up the investment fund for my dad's business. I gave Chloe a credit card for emergencies, a term she interpreted very, very broadly. In my naivety, I thought I was helping. I thought I was being a good daughter, a good sister. But over the years, my help had curdled into expectation. My generosity had become their entitlement. They had absorbed my success into their own narrative so completely that I don't think they even saw it as mine anymore. It was just family money, a magical, regenerating resource provided by the universe, which my father, as the patriarch, had the right to manage, and my sister, as the creative genius, had the right to spend, and I, the actual source of the money, was relegated to the role of a walking, talking ATM. A very sensible ATM. Still plugging away at that computer stuff, Maya, my Uncle Bill, asked, clapping me on the shoulder with a damp, heavy hand. Good for you, stable is good. He took a long gulp of his scotch. Now your sister, Chloe, she's something else. A real visionary. Mark my words. That girl is going to be a star. I just smiled. I'm sure she will be. What else could I say? How could I explain that the computer stuff he was so dismissive of was the very thing funding his glass of 18-year-old single malt? How could I explain that Chloe's vision was a kaleidoscope of half-baked, expensive ideas that never went anywhere I couldn't? It would have broken the illusion. It would have ruined the party. So I stood there, in the house that was mine, at the party that was mine, surrounded by the family that was supposed to be mine, and I felt utterly, completely alone, a ghost in my own machine. The pretty string lights started to feel like a web. The beautiful garden felt like a gilded cage I had foolishly built for myself, and then locked myself inside. I could feel a familiar tension beginning to build in the air. This wasn't just an anniversary party. I knew my family. These lavish events were always a prelude. They were the fattening up before the kill. They were softening me up, reminding me of all this wonderful family togetherness, before they made their next big ask. And I had a sinking feeling I knew what it was. The feeling solidified into certainty when my father, his face flushed with champagne and self-importance, picked up a spoon and tapped it against his crystal glass. The string quartet trailed off. The chatter died down. 100 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Friends, family, he began, his voice booming across the lawn. Thank you all for coming to celebrate 30 wonderful years with my beautiful bride, Eleanor. He paused for a round of applause. My mother blushed prettily. But tonight, he continued, a dramatic glint in his eye, we are also celebrating the future. We are celebrating vision. We are celebrating the next great chapter in the Cartwright legacy. He beamed and gestured toward my sister. My brilliant daughter Chloe has a little something she wants to share with all of you. The crowd murmured with anticipation. Chloe stepped forward into the center of the patio, a single spotlight from the house seeming to find her as if by divine intervention. She looked radiant, confident, triumphant. She looked like a woman who was about to get everything she'd ever wanted. My stomach plummeted. The air in my lungs felt cold and thin. The beautiful cage I had built was suddenly shrinking, the gilded bars pressing in on me. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was it. The party was over. The storm had just made landfall. As Chloe stood preening in that perfect, artificial spotlight, my mind disconnected. The sound of my father's proud introduction faded into a dull buzz. The faces of the expectant guests blurred into a watercolor wash. My consciousness retreated from the manicured garden and traveled back in time, not out of nostalgia, but for fortification. To remind myself how we got here, to remember every brick I had laid in the foundation of my own gilded cage. 10 years ago, there were no caterers, no string quartets, no sprawling colonial houses. There was just a cramped, cinder-block dorm room that smelled of stale coffee and ramen noodles. There was me, a 19-year-old girl with glasses. I was always pushing up my nose, surrounded by textbooks and illuminated by the bluish glow of a computer monitor. Back then, my family was normal, middle class. My father worked in middle management at a company that was slowly downsizing him into irrelevance, a fact that made him proud and bitter in equal measure. My mother was a substitute teacher. We lived in a modest suburban house where the mortgage was a constant topic of hushed, anxious conversation. Chloe was already Chloe, the high school drama club star, the prom queen, the one everyone said was destined for great things. And I was Maya, the quiet one, the nerdy one, the one whose idea of a good time was learning a new coding language. They loved me, I think, in their own way, but they didn't understand me. My passion wasn't flashy. It didn't win applause. It was the quiet, intricate work of building things inside a machine. My project back then, the one that consumed me, wasn't for a grade or a competition. It was an obsession. I'd taken a part-time job helping a local distributor manage their inventory, and I was appalled by the inefficiency. So, I started building an algorithm in my spare time, a piece of code that could analyze shipping routes, warehouse capacity, and delivery schedules to create the most ruthlessly efficient supply chain possible. I called it Logicore. For a year, Logicore was my secret world. I worked on it between classes, late into the night when my roommate was asleep, fueled by cheap energy drinks and a pure, unadulterated love for solving the puzzle. It was elegant, it was complex, and it was mine. The end came faster than I could have ever imagined. A professor saw my work. He showed it to a colleague, who had a contact at a major logistics corporation. Suddenly, I wasn't a 19-year-old in a dorm room anymore. I was sitting in sterile, glass-walled boardrooms, trying not to spill coffee on my one good blazer. While men in expensive suits threw around numbers that didn't seem real, they weren't interested in a partnership. They wanted to buy it, outright, the day the deal closed. A number with 7 zeros after it appeared in my bank account. I remember staring at my laptop screen, feeling not elation, but a profound, gut-wrenching terror. It was like I had been handed the keys to a nuclear reactor. I had no idea how to drive it, and I was terrified of what would happen if I pressed the wrong button. My first thought, my only thought, was my family. All those hushed conversations about the mortgage, my dad's pride, so bruised by his stalled career, my mom's constant worry. I had the power to fix it all. I could give them a life without that anxiety. It was a pure impulse, a loving one. It was also the most catastrophic mistake I ever made. The first brick in my cage was the house. I found it online, the perfect white colonial with black shutters my mother had always dreamed of. I toured it alone. I signed the papers alone. My grand plan was to surprise them. I'll never forget the day I drove them up the long, tree-lined driveway and parked in front. "What is this, Maya?" my mother had asked, confused. I just held out a small gift-wrapped box. Inside was a single key with a big red bow tied to it. The reaction was everything I had hoped for. My mother burst into tears, the happy, unrestrained kind. She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. My dad was speechless, for once. He just walked up the porch steps, ran his hand along the railing, and looked out over the 2-acre lawn. But then he said the words that should have been a warning. He put his hands on his hips, puffed out his chest, and turned to my mother. "Well, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We finally did it. A proper home for the Cartwrights. Not. Maya, you did it. Not. Thank you for this incredible gift. But we did it." In that single moment, my singular, life-altering act of generosity was absorbed into the collective family narrative. I had bought the house, but somehow we had achieved it. It was the most subtle, most brilliant magic trick I'd ever seen. And I was so high on their happiness, I didn't even see the trapdoor opening beneath my feet. After the house, the rest came in a slow, steady cascade. My father was forced into early retirement a few months later. He was miserable. He wanted to feel important again. He had an idea to start his own consulting business. "I have the contacts, the experience," he'd explained to me over dinner. "I just need some capital to get things off the ground. Think of it as a strategic investment in the family's future, Maya. A loan, of course. I'll pay you back with interest once the business takes off." I wanted to see him happy. I wanted him to have his pride back, so I wrote the check. A very large check. The consulting business was launched. He got business cards printed. He took his friends out for expensive lunches on the company dime. The loan was never mentioned again. The fund I had set up for him just became an extension of his personal bank account. And I became the silent, unacknowledged board of directors. Then came Chloe. She graduated college with a degree in Renaissance art history and a deep-seated aversion to a 9-to-5 job. She wanted to move to the city to pursue her art. "I just need a little help with rent, Maya," she'd said, her voice full of artistic angst during a phone call. "Just for a few months, until I get on my feet and the galleries start noticing me." So I paid the deposit and first month's rent on a trendy Soho loft. The few months turned into a year, then 2. I gave her a credit card for emergencies, which she defined as a new pair of designer shoes, a spontaneous weekend trip to Miami, or a dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant she'd post about on Instagram with the caption, "Darker part, living my best life." Whenever I would gently try to broach the subject of a budget, my parents would run interference. "Oh, Maya, don't be so hard on your sister," my mother would say. "She's a creative soul. You can't put a price on her journey. You're so lucky to have a stable job so you can help her." My success wasn't my own. It was a utility for the family. Its only purpose was to enable Chloe's journey and fund my father's ego. They rewrote our history so completely that I started to doubt my own memories. At family gatherings, my father would talk about his portfolio, gesturing vaguely at the house, the cars, the life he was providing. He was no longer the man I'd bailed out of a bad investment. He was a self-made patriarch. Chloe was no longer the unemployed artist living off her sister. She was a bold visionary on the cusp of greatness, and I, the source of it all, was good old Maya, the sensible one with the nice little tech gig. They talked about the sale of my company, if they mentioned it at all, as a stroke of luck or good family fortune, as if we'd all bought a winning lottery ticket together. I remember one Christmas Eve a few years ago. I had just come from a tense end-of-year meeting with my financial advisor, the numbers showing a truly alarming burn rate from my family's accounts. I tried to talk to my father about it, spreading out a few printouts on the coffee table. He didn't even look at them. He just chuckled, patted my hand with infuriating condescension, and said, "Maya, Maya, Maya, don't you worry your pretty little head about these things. That's what I'm here for. The man of the house handles the big picture finances." He picked up a log for the fire. "You just keep doing your little computer thing. It brings in a nice supplementary income for us all." Supplementary income. He had called my entire fortune, the fortune that paid for the roof over his head, the log in his hand, the very air he was breathing, a nice little supplementary income. I felt so small, so utterly erased. I couldn't even speak. I just folded up the papers and put them away. That was the moment I should have walked away, but I didn't. The habit of giving, the fear of their disapproval, the deeply ingrained role of the good daughter, it was a prison I couldn't see the bars of. The awakening came slowly, then all at once. It was a conversation with my own advisor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Helen. I was explaining away another one of my father's business expenses. Helen just looked at me over her glasses, her expression unreadable. "Maya," she said quietly, "my job is to manage your money, but I have to tell you, as a human being, this isn't an investment strategy. It's a hostage situation, and you're the one paying the ransom." A hostage situation. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. After that, I started to see it. Really see it. I saw the condescension behind my father's pride. I saw the manipulation behind my mother's sweetness. I saw the bottomless, grasping entitlement behind my sister's charm. They weren't a family I was supporting. I was a resource they were draining. I was the host, and they were the parasites, dressed in designer clothes. And I knew, with a certainty that made me feel sick and free at the same time, that it had to stop. I just needed to wait for the right moment, the moment when the choice was so clear, so unambiguous, that I couldn't back down. My mind snapped back to the present, to the garden, to the party. Chloe was standing in the spotlight, her smile dazzling, her posture radiating a supreme confidence. She cleared her throat, and the last vestiges of conversation died away. All eyes were on her, on the golden child, the firecracker, the artist of life. I took a slow, deep breath. The years of resentment, of being minimized and dismissed and used, coalesced inside me. They hardened from a murky fog into a single, sharp point of steel in my spine. I finally saw the bars of my cage, and I was ready to burn the whole thing to the ground. Chloe stepped into the center of the patio, and a hush fell over the garden. She radiated a kind of manufactured destiny, a skill she had perfected over years of being the center of attention. She had a presentation easel next to her, draped in a swath of cream-colored silk. It was all so theatrical, so Chloe. "Thank you, Daddy," she began, her voice a warm, melodious purr that could charm a snake out of its skin. "And thank you all for being here to celebrate my wonderful parents on this incredible milestone." She paused, letting the applause wash over her. It's their commitment to love, family, and building a beautiful life that has always been my greatest inspiration. I nearly choked on my water. Their commitment to building a beautiful life was funded almost exclusively by my ones and zeros. But that was a footnote she'd conveniently erased from her speech. "And it's in that spirit of creation and beauty," she continued, her eyes sweeping across the rapt audience, "that I am finally ready to unveil the project I have been pouring my heart and soul into." With a dramatic flourish, she whipped the silk cloth off the easel. On it was a large, professionally printed mood board. The aesthetic was a parody of every luxury wellness brand on Instagram. There were soft-focus photos of ethereal-looking models meditating in fields of wildflowers, close-ups of dewy skin, and artfully arranged crystals. At the top, in an elegant, unreadable script, was the brand name Aura Botanica. "I'm not just launching a skincare line," Chloe announced, her voice dropping to a confidential, reverent tone. "I'm launching a movement, a return to the elemental. Aura Botanica isn't about covering up flaws. It's about aligning your inner spirit with your outer radiance." I had to clench my jaw to keep my expression neutral. Internally, I was screaming. We were aligning spirits now a year ago. It was hand-woven macrame wall hangings. The year before that, it was a podcast about celebrity dogs that produced 2 episodes before she got bored. As she spoke, my mind was running calculations, not absorbing her marketing drivel. I was deconstructing the business plan I knew was coming. "Each product," she went on, gesturing to some small, elegant bottles she had arranged on a nearby table, "is crafted from the rarest, ethically sourced organic ingredients. We have night-blooming jasmine from the hills of Bali, rosehip oil from the Andes, and every single batch will be infused with the vibrational energy of a curated, moon-charged rose quartz crystal." I mentally added up the costs. Sourcing rare, unstable organic ingredients, astronomical. Custom-designed glass bottles and packaging, a logistical nightmare. Hiring a lab for formulation and testing, a massive upfront expense. And moon-charged crystals, that was just a line item for gullibility. I could see the whole disastrous trajectory laid out in my mind like one of my own data projections. I saw the thousands spent on influencer marketing, the splashy launch party, the initial burst of sales to her friends. And then the slow, inevitable fade into obscurity as the next aura-aligning brand came along. I saw the boxes of unsold, expired vibrational energy face cream ending up in the same corner of the garage as the dozens of unsold macrame owls. Of course, Chloe said, bringing me back to the present. A vision this bold requires a strong foundation. We've already done the market research. I knew for a fact she hadn't. And the initial projections are, frankly, explosive. All we need is the initial seed capital to fund our first production run and marketing push. She paused, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. And then, she did it. She turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping past my parents and landing squarely on me. A slow, confident, entitled smile spread across her face. It wasn't a question, it was a coronation. She had just been crowned queen, and she was looking at her royal treasurer to open the vaults. My father picked up his cue perfectly. He stepped forward and put his arm around Chloe again. And we are so fortunate, he boomed, his eyes locking onto mine, that this family has its own visionary investor to help get an incredible venture like this off the ground. Someone who has always understood the importance of investing in family, and who has the means to make dreams a reality. Isn't that right, Maya? The entire party turned to look at me. 100 pairs of eyes. I was pinned in the spotlight, no longer a stagehand in the shadows, but the reluctant star of the second act. The silence was thick with expectation. My mother was smiling at me, a fixed, painted-on smile that was both an encouragement and a command. Do your duty, play your part, write the check. Chloe's smirk was unwavering. She already believed the money was hers. This was all just a formality. In that moment, 10 years of silent resentment, of being used and minimized and taken for granted, came to a head. Helen's words echoed in my ears. This isn't an investment strategy. It's a hostage situation. And she was right. They were all holding me hostage, using their love and my sense of obligation as the weapons. But they had made a critical mistake. They had pushed me too far. And they had done it in public. I let the silence stretch, just for a beat longer. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. Then, I met my sister's confident gaze. I did not look at my father or my mother. This was between me and her, between the foundation and the facade. It sounds very passionate. Chloe, I said, my voice surprisingly calm and clear. It cut through the garden party ambiance like a surgeon's scalpel. But no, the word, so small, so simple, landed with the force of a physical blow. The air crackled. The smiles on my parents' faces froze, then began to crumble. Chloe's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of stunned disbelief. Excuse me, she said, a nervous little laugh escaping her lips. What did you just say? I said no, I repeated, my voice still quiet, still even. I will not be investing in this project. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was not part of the script. My mother sprang into action, her social instincts going into overdrive. She rushed forward with a frantic, tinkling laugh. Oh, Maya, she exclaimed, trying to turn it into a joke. You're such a tease, always so serious with your business head on. Of course she's proud of you, Chloe, darling. She's just being dramatic. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading command. Take it back, fix this. I just looked at her. I'm not joking, Mom. The disbelief on Chloe's face curdled into indignation. The color rose in her cheeks. I don't understand, she said, her voice rising, losing its purring quality and taking on a sharp, whining edge. You always support me. This is my dream. Maya. I've been working on this for months. Are you saying you don't believe in me? The emotional blackmail had begun, right on schedule. This has nothing to do with believing in you, Chloe, I said calmly. This has to do with it being an unsound business proposal with an exceptionally high risk of failure. My answer is no. The bluntness of my assessment, the cold, hard language of business, was something they were not prepared for. They were used to my acquiescence, my quiet funding of their fantasies. They had no idea how to handle a rational, financial refusal. My father stepped forward, his face darkening, his jovial host persona evaporating to reveal the angry, entitled man beneath. "Maya, that's enough," he said, his voice low and menacing. "This is inappropriate. You are embarrassing your sister. You are embarrassing this family in front of our guests." "The only thing embarrassing here," I replied, my gaze not wavering from his, "is the assumption that I am a bottomless source of funding for every whim that comes along. That assumption is no longer valid. My role as the family bank is now officially closed." It was a declaration of independence, a declaration of war. I wasn't just saying no to Aura Botanica. I was saying no to the whole rotten structure. I was saying no to being the invisible foundation, the sensible rock, the ghost in the machine. A horrified silence fell over the party guests. They were no longer watching a charming announcement. They were watching a family implode. Some started to whisper to each other. Others looked down at their shoes, desperate to be anywhere else. Chloe looked as if I had physically struck her. "How can you do this to me?" she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. They were real tears, I think. But they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage that her will had been thwarted. "I'm not doing anything to you, Chloe," I said, a profound weariness washing over me. "I'm doing something for me, for the first time." I turned my back on them, on the easel with its ridiculous mood board, on the crowd of shocked faces. I had said what I needed to say. The conversation was over. I just wanted to go inside, to be alone, to breathe air that wasn't thick with their suffocating expectations. But I only made it 2 steps before a hand clamped down on my arm. Gripping it with bruising force, I stopped, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned my head. It was my father. His face was purple with rage. His eyes were bulging, all pretense of the proud patriarch gone, replaced by a raw, ugly fury. He was a king whose authority had just been challenged in open court, and he was not going to let it stand. "You don't walk away from me," he snarled, his voice a guttural growl that was barely human. "Not in my house. Not after everything I've done for you." The sheer, staggering audacity of that statement, "Everything I've done for you," was the final spark in the powder keg. The last thread of my restraint snapped. "Your house," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You think this is your house." And that was when his control broke completely. My father's hand on my arm was a manacle. His fingers, usually soft from a life of leisure I had provided, dug into my flesh with a strength I didn't know he possessed. His face, inches from mine, was a grotesque mask of fury. The jovial, charming host was gone, replaced by a cornered animal, all bared teeth and wild eyes. "You don't walk away from me," he snarled, his voice a low growl that vibrated through his hand into my bones. Spittle flecked his lips. "Not in my house. Not after everything I've done for you." The absurdity of it, the sheer, epic, galaxy-sized delusion of that one sentence, was the final thing that broke my silence. The dam of my decade-long restraint didn't just crack. It disintegrated. The weariness I had felt moments before was burned away by a sudden, cold, righteous anger. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up into his furious eyes. My voice, when I spoke, was devoid of heat. It was dangerously, terrifyingly calm. "Your house?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to silence the nervous murmurs that had started around us. "You really want to have this conversation? Right here, you want to talk about your house?" I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He was expecting tears, fear, submission. He was not expecting a quiet, deadly challenge. "Let's talk about this house, Dad," I continued, my voice gaining a hard, clear edge. "Let's talk about who signed the closing papers with the realtor 3 years ago. Let's talk about who wired the down payment from a brokerage account he didn't even know existed. Let's talk about who makes the 6-figure mortgage and property tax payments every single year. Because I have the bank statements to prove it certainly isn't you." With every word, I could feel his grip faltering. I was not playing by the rules of our little family drama anymore. I was introducing facts into their world of fantasy, and their world couldn't bear the weight of them. "And while we're at it," I said, my gaze sweeping over to my mother, who stood frozen with horror, "let's talk about the company that paid for your new car last year, and let's talk about the investment portfolio that funds your country club membership and your shopping trips. Dad, I turned back to him. That's not your portfolio, it's mine. You're not a consultant. You're my biggest, most consistent, and least profitable expense. His face went from purple with rage to a mottled, sickly white. I had done it. I had stripped him bare in front of everyone. I had taken his performance as the self-made patriarch and revealed him for what he was, a kept man. A fraud living a life funded by the little computer thing his daughter did. His authority, his very identity, was built on a lie, and I had just exposed it to the world. He had no words left. He had no arguments. He had no defense. So he resorted to the only tool he had left, the tool of a bully who has lost control. His hand released my arm only to swing back. It was a blur of motion. I saw it coming, but I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I stood my ground and met his rage with a stillness that I think infuriated him more than anything else. The sound was not a slap. It was a crack. It was a sharp, ugly, percussive sound that ripped through the elegant party atmosphere and obliterated it. It was the sound of bone hitting bone. It echoed in the sudden, tomb-like silence that fell over the garden. The Vivaldi from the string quartet stopped mid-note. I heard a champagne flute shatter on the flagstones somewhere behind me. The world, for one horrifying second, seemed to stop breathing. My head whipped to the side from the force of the blow. A sunburst of pain exploded across my cheek. Hot and stinging, my teeth had cut into the inside of my lip, and the coppery, metallic taste of blood filled my mouth for a heartbeat. The fairy lights blurred into streaks of white, and the world tilted on its axis. When my vision cleared, the scene before me was a tableau of horror. The party guests were frozen like statues in a nightmare museum. My Uncle Bill's mouth was hanging open. A woman I didn't know had her hands pressed to her own cheeks in shock. The caterers had stopped moving. Everyone was staring, their faces a mixture of pity, disgust, and fear. They were all witnesses. There was no hiding this. There was no pretending it didn't happen. I slowly, deliberately, turned my head back to face my family. My cheek was screaming. A raw, throbbing pulse that matched the beat of my heart, but the physical pain was nothing. It was a distant signal from a body I barely felt connected to. My father was standing over me, his chest heaving, his hand still raised slightly. A look of dazed shock on his own face, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just done. My mother had one hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror, not for me, I realized, but for the social apocalypse that had just occurred in her perfect garden. But it was in the space between them that I saw it. The thing that would change me forever, the thing that severed the last, corroded thread of love and obligation I had for these people. A sound. Into the dead, absolute silence of the garden, a new sound began. Clap! It was a single, sharp report, so out of place, so alien, that at first, my brain couldn't process it. Clap! Again, slower this time, deliberate, mocking. I looked past my father's heaving form, my eyes searching for the source of the sound. And I found her. It was Chloe. She was standing by the now-abandoned champagne fountain, and she was applauding. Her hands were coming together in a slow, rhythmic, theatrical clap. Her head was tilted to one side, and a small, smug, vicious smile played on her lips. Her eyes, gleaming in the fairy lights, were locked on mine. They were not filled with shock or horror or concern. They were filled with triumph, pure, unadulterated, venomous victory. She was cheering. My father had slapped me, and my sister was giving him a standing ovation. In that instant, something inside me died. It was the soft, stupid, hopeful part of me that had always made excuses for her. The part that believed her selfishness was just immaturity, that her cruelty was just a cry for attention. I saw her then for what she was, not a rival, not a spoiled child, but an enemy, someone who not only resented my success, but actively reveled in my pain. My humiliation was her victory. My suffering was her entertainment. The pain in my cheek faded, replaced by an invading coldness so profound it felt like my blood was turning to ice. The shock evaporated, the hurt vanished. All the messy, complicated emotions I had felt for my family, the love, the resentment, the guilt, The duty were incinerated in the heat of her hateful smile. All that was left was a vast, empty, and strangely peaceful clarity. I had been trying to save a family that never existed. I had been pouring my life into a foundation that was rotten to the core. The house wasn't a home, it was a stage. And these people were not my family. They were my captors. The slap was just an act of violence. The applause was the truth. I looked away from Chloe's triumphant face. I looked at my mother's paralyzed, socially ruined expression. I looked at my father's pathetic, post-rage confusion. I saw them, for the first time in my life. I saw them with no filters, no excuses, no hope, a bully, a viper, a coward. My three-person family. Without a word, I turned around. My movements were not hurried. They were not the actions of a victim fleeing a scene. They were the calm, measured, deliberate movements of a person who had just made a final, irrevocable decision. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on my back as I walked away from the tableau of my shattered family. I walked past the shocked faces of the guests, past the shattered champagne flute, past the silent string quartet. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I walked through the French doors, into the house I had bought. The cool, quiet air of the house enveloped me. I was not running away. I was not retreating. I was going to get my weapon. And it was ringing silently in my pocket. I walked away from them, each step a deliberate, measured act of secession. The gasps and horrified whispers of the party guests were a meaningless hiss of static in the background. My cheek throbbed with a dull, distant heat, a physical anchor to the moment that had just changed everything. But the pain was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was them, and I had just discovered the cure. I walked through the open French doors, leaving the chaos of the garden behind. My house was cool and quiet. The air inside smelled of freshly cut flowers and floor polish. I passed the grand, sweeping staircase my mother had fallen in love with. The ornate gilt mirror she'd spent a week choosing. I saw it all now, not as a home, but as a stage set, a collection of expensive props for a play that had just ended. Its final, ugly act having played out for all to see. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger's, a woman with a livid red mark blooming on her left cheek and eyes that were as calm and cold as a frozen lake. The scared, accommodating girl who had walked into this party was gone, slapped out of existence. In her place was someone I was just beginning to meet, and she was terrifyingly, wonderfully serene. I didn't stop in the hallway. I didn't collapse onto one of my mother's precious antique settees. I walked with a singular purpose down the hall, past the living room that was a shrine to my father's ego, and opened the door to my home office. This room was the only space in the house that was truly mine. It was my sanctuary, my command center. Unlike the rest of the house, with its fussy, traditional decor, my office was minimalist and modern. A large, dark wood desk dominated the room, facing a wall of windows that looked out onto a quiet, wooded part of the property, far away from the party. Multiple monitors sat on the desk, one of them glowing softly with real-time market data. This was a room of logic, of facts, of cause and effect. A room where sentimentality had no place. It was the perfect place for what I was about to do. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair. It molded to my back, a familiar, comforting pressure. I took a deep breath, the first one that felt like my own in years. I felt the last vestiges of adrenaline and shock drain away, leaving only the hard, diamond-bright core of my resolve. Then, I pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I scrolled to my contacts and pressed the name I had programmed in under an emergency designation 6 months ago. After my conversation with Helen, the name was simply the protocol. She picked up on the second ring. Maya, it's after 9 o'clock on a Saturday. Is everything all right? Helen's voice was sharp, professional, but laced with an undercurrent of genuine concern. I'm fine, Helen, I said, my own voice so calm it surprised even me. Better than fine, actually. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Helen was smart. She could hear the difference in my voice, the absence of the usual stress, the usual apologetic tone I used when discussing my family. What's happened? She asked quietly. The hostage situation is over, I said simply. It's time. Execute the severance protocol. Another pause. This one longer. I could picture her in her own home office, sitting up straighter, probably pulling up my portfolio on her screen. She had helped me draft the protocol, a series of financial maneuvers so swift and total they were designed to function as a financial nuclear option. We had created it as a hypothetical, a break glass in case of emergency tool I never truly believed I would use. Are you sure, Maya? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Once we start this, there is no going back. The effects will be immediate. I am 100% certain, I said. Looking out the window at the darkening woods. Start with the credit lines, all of them. The supplementary cards on my personal accounts. And the business line of credit for Cartwright Consulting. I want them frozen, effective 10 minutes ago. Understood, Helen said. The sound of clicking keys came through the phone. Credit facilities are being suspended as we speak. What's next? The house, I said, looking around the beautifully appointed office. Contact our real estate agent first thing Monday morning. I want it on the market by noon. Price it to sell. I don't want a bidding war. I want a clean, fast exit. Done, Helen said, her voice all business now. What about the investment fund your father manages? Dissolve it, I said without hesitation. Liquidate the assets. Transfer the balance to my primary trust. Inform him via official email from your office that his management authority has been revoked. Effective immediately. It's done, she said again. The finality of her words was a balm to my soul. Is there anything else? No, Helen, I said. That's all. Thank you. Maya, she started, then hesitated. Be safe. I've never been safer, I replied, and ended the call. I sat there for a long moment in the quiet of my office, the phone resting on the desk in front of me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt nothing. A profound and peaceful emptiness. The emptiness of a space that has finally been cleared of a lifetime of toxic clutter. I had just dismantled my family's entire existence with a 2-minute phone call. I had taken away their home, their income, their status, their very identity. I had taken back what was mine. The first tremor from the earthquake I had just triggered arrived less than 5 minutes later. The door to my office burst open without a knock. It was my mother, her face pale and frantic. Her perfect hostess smile gone, replaced by a mask of sheer panic. Maya, thank God something is terribly wrong, she said, rushing toward my desk. I just tried to pay the caterer the final installment and my card was declined. All of them. It's mortifying the man is standing out there making a scene. There must be some sort of fraud alert on the accounts. You have to call the bank right now. She was breathless, her hands fluttering at her chest. She was looking at me, her daughter, the sensible one, to fix her problem, just as I always had. I swiveled my chair to face her fully. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her and said, "There's no mistake, Mom, and there's no fraud." What? She blinked, not understanding. What are you talking about? Then what is it? I closed the accounts, I said simply. Her face crumpled in confusion. You... What? Why would you do that? How are we supposed to pay him? I reached into my purse, took out my personal wallet, the one they had never had access to, and pulled out my own Amex card, the black card, the one whose existence they were completely unaware of. I slid it across the polished surface of the desk toward her. Pay him with this, I said, my voice flat. It will be the last bill I ever pay on your behalf. She stared at the unfamiliar black card as if it were a venomous snake. Before she could process this, my father stormed into the room, his face a thundercloud, brandishing his smartphone like a weapon. What the hell did you do? He roared, shoving the phone in my face. The screen showed a series of notifications. Urgent, your line of credit has been suspended. Alert, irregular activity on your account. I just got off the phone with the bank, he yelled. They're saying the entire business credit line, my credit line, has been revoked. They said the guarantor pulled out. That's you. What the hell is going on? Maya. I looked from his furious face to my mother's panicked one, and right on cue. The third member of the party arrived. Chloe appeared in the doorway behind them, her face streaked with mascara. Her earlier triumph replaced with a shrewish anger. My card isn't working, she shrieked, her voice shrill. I tried to call an Uber Black to get the hell out of this nightmare party. And it was declined, Maya. What is going on? Why is this happening? The three of them stood there, framed in the doorway of my office, a chorus of panicked, entitled demands. For years, they had been the ones in control. The ones who set the terms, now. The power had shifted so completely, so seismically, that they were flailing, lost. They were coming to me, the ATM, the ghost in the machine, demanding to know why the free money had suddenly stopped. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. I looked at the three of them, the architects of my misery, now looking at me as their only hope, and I felt the last flicker of fear I had of them die out completely. It's very simple, I said, my voice cutting through their collective panic. I pointed at my father. The line of credit you called yours was never yours. It was guaranteed by my assets, against my portfolio. I have revoked my guarantee. The business no longer exists because it was never a business. It was my charity. I turned my gaze to my mother. The credit cards you used were supplementary cards on my accounts. Those accounts are now closed to you. Finally, I looked at my sister. The applause still echoed in my memory. And Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm. It wasn't a card. It was an allowance. And it has been discontinued, permanently. I let the words hang in the air. The truth. Stark and brutal and undeniable. The color drained from their faces as the implications of what I was saying, of what I had done, began to sink in. They were looking at the ruins of their lives, and they were only just beginning to understand that I was the one holding the demolition charges. The party outside was over. The real drama had just begun. They stood in the doorway of my office like a trinity of ruin, their faces cycling through the stages of grief in real time, shock, denial, and now, as the full weight of my words settled upon them, raw, unadulterated anger. It was my mother who found her voice first, her weapon of choice, as always. Being guilt. Maya, how could you, she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. After everything we've done for you, we gave you a wonderful life. We love you. How can you be so cruel to your own family? Love? I asked. And the word sounded foreign in my own mouth. I looked at the blooming red mark on my cheek, still tender to the touch. I thought of my sister's smiling, applauding face. Let me tell you what love isn't. Mom, love isn't a transaction. It's not an invoice you send me every month for your country club dues. Love doesn't demand a six-figure investment for a half-baked fantasy. And love damn sure doesn't applaud while your daughter is being physically assaulted by her own father. My mother recoiled as if I had slapped her. My father, seeing that his wife's emotional tactics had failed, lunged forward with his own pure, impotent rage. You ungrateful brat, he bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. You think you're so powerful with all your money. I am still your father. I brought you into this world. You will regret this. You hear me one day. You'll be all alone with your piles of cash, and you'll come crawling back to us. I almost laughed. It was the last, desperate roar of a dethroned king, trying to convince himself his cardboard castle wasn't turning to dust around him. Let's be clear about two things. Dad, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through his tirade. First, the only thing I regret is that I didn't do this 5 years ago. And second, I will never, ever crawl back to a house that I own but am not respected in. I let that sink in. You didn't bring me into your world. I brought you into mine. And today, your visa has expired. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was finally, blessedly, out of arguments. It was Chloe who made the final, desperate plea. The reality of her situation had finally pierced through her thick armor of entitlement. Her face was a mess of tears and rage. But my apartment, she wailed, her voice cracking. My car. My whole life, you can't just take it all away. It's not fair. Fair, that one word, from her lips, was the most obscene thing I had heard all night. I stood up from my chair, the motion slow and deliberate. I walked around the desk until I was standing directly in front of them. I was no longer hiding behind my desk, my fortress of logic. I was facing them on my own 2 feet. I looked directly at my sister, the beautiful, dazzling firecracker. Now just a panicked, weeping girl who had just realized the fireworks were over. You want to talk about what's fair? Chloe, I asked, my voice dangerously soft. You stood in a garden that I paid for, at a party I paid for, wearing a dress I paid for, and you clapped. You clapped when he hit me. You smiled while I was being humiliated. So you and I are going to have a little lesson in fairness right now. The word fair does not exist between us anymore. You are a grown woman. For the first time in your life, you are going to be treated like one. It's time for you to learn what that actually means. She just stared at me, her mouth agape, sobbing. I looked at the three of them. A tableau of broken illusions. My work here was done. I had delivered the facts. I had laid out the truth. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on them and walked over to the small coat closet in the office where I kept my purse and car keys. I picked up my simple, sensible handbag. I took out my car keys. The familiar weight of them in my hand was the weight of freedom. Wait, my mother cried out, a note of pure desperation in her voice. Maya, where are you going? What are we supposed to do? I paused at the door, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see their faces anymore. I had them memorized. That's a great question, Mom, I said over my shoulder. I'm sure you'll all figure it out. It's what most adults do. And with that, I walked out of the office, leaving them standing there in the ruins of the life I had given them. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly cavernous house. The sounds of the party's collapse were all around me. The caterers were packing up their things in a grim, hurried silence. I could hear the hushed, urgent whispers of the few remaining guests as they scurried toward the door, eager to escape this house of horrors. I walked straight out the front door, the one with the big, welcoming wreath my mother had insisted upon. The cool night air hit my face, and it felt like the first clean breath I had taken in a decade. It smelled of damp earth and freedom. I didn't look back at the house, with its glowing windows and the wreckage of a family inside. I didn't look at the cars, fleeing the scene of the social crime. I got into my car, a practical, reliable sedan, not the flashy sports car my father had always wanted me to buy him. I put the key in the ignition and started the engine. The quiet, steady hum was the sound of my new life beginning. I pulled out of the long, tree-lined driveway, and as I turned onto the main road, I allowed myself one glance in the rearview mirror. I could see the house, my beautiful, expensive prison, receding in the darkness, a gilded cage with its door finally, blessedly, flung open. Then I faced forward, and I drove. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in my life, I knew I was heading in the right direction. That was a year ago. I'm sitting in my new home. It's not a sprawling colonial mansion. It's a minimalist condo on the 20th floor of a building overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The only sounds are the distant cry of gulls and the rhythmic shushing of the waves on the shore below. The walls are mostly bare. The furniture is functional and beautiful. Everything in this space, I chose. Everything in this space, I earned. Everything in this space is mine. And it is peaceful. The big house sold in less than a month. I heard through the grapevine a text from a cousin who had called to check if I was okay that my parents had to downsize. Dramatically, they live in a small rental apartment now, 2 towns over. My father, I heard, got a job as a part-time sales associate at a hardware store. My mother is substitute teaching again. Chloe works as a waitress at a chain restaurant. She shares a tiny apartment with 2 other girls. Her Instagram is no longer full of glamorous trips and designer clothes. It's mostly pictures of her cat. They have not tried to contact me, not once. The silence has been absolute. I don't know if it's out of shame or anger, or if they've simply erased me from their lives as completely as I've excised them from my bank accounts. It doesn't matter. The silence is a gift. I didn't destroy their lives. I just stopped paying for a life they hadn't earned. I removed the scaffolding of my support, and they fell to the level their own choices had built for them. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of reality. The red mark on my cheek faded in a week, but the change it marked inside me is permanent. The slap didn't break me. It woke me up. The applause didn't crush me. It set me free. So, for anyone out there watching this, for anyone who is the silent, invisible foundation holding up a family that doesn't see you, that doesn't respect you, I want you to remember this. You are not just the foundation. You are the architect. You are the one who holds the plans. And you are the one who can decide to walk off the job site and start a new project. A project called your own life. It is the most terrifying and the most exhilarating demolition job you will ever undertake. But the peace you find in the quiet aftermath, it's priceless. Thank you for listening. Smash that like button, subscribe for more stories, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that they have the power to walk away. I'll see you in the next one.